In today's video, we're covering the debt ceiling, what this means for the US economy, what this means for investors in the stock markets. So what's the current status? This is basically a big heads up for everyone. Okay, so let me explain this to you so that we're on the same page. The US government is broke. So if you didn't know that, if you didn't realize that, it's the truth. The US government is in massive debt, and we're all gonna continue to play this game until the game can no longer be played. And when it ends, it's going to be catastrophic, not just for Americans, but for everyone, for all countries globally. And we're going to take down everyone with us. But the good news is that we're not there yet. So let's talk about right now. So let me tell you why I'm saying that the US government is broke. The federal government gets the bulk of their money from tax collections. So we're talking about federal income taxes, payroll taxes, Social Security, and Medicare taxes. The federal government, or the IRS, they're collecting about $5 trillion a year in tax collections. So that sounds like a lot. That is a lot of money. However, the federal government, okay, they get $5 trillion incoming, but they spend $6 trillion, they spend $7 trillion. They're overspending. So ultimately, the government is just spending more money than they have coming in. So the US government continues to borrow money to keep up this spending habit. So they continue to borrow money. They go further into debts by about $1 to $2 trillion a year. The US government is already in debt by $31 trillion. So the government owes this debt. So the government owes money to basically everyone. They owe money to corporations, to foreign countries, banks, institutions, investors, anybody who's buying the treasury, the bills, the notes, the bonds. So if you own some mutual funds in your retirement account, then the US government probably owes you some money. So the government is pulling in, so the federal government, they're pulling in about $5 trillion a year, and they're spending 6 or 7 trillion. Let's be generous and let's just say 6, call it 6, right? And they're in debt, $31 trillion. So to give you some context about this situation, that's like you making $50,000 a year, you spend $60,000 a year, and you have student loan debts of $310,000. So how are you going to pay down this massive amount of debt that's racking up interest when you're spending more money than you make every year? So just to get by, the US government needs to borrow more money all the time, and they're continuing to add to the debt. However, the problem is that there is a debt limit. The US government has hit the legal borrowing limit on January 19th. This means that the government cannot borrow any more money unless the politicians, they greenlight, unless they vote that they can to raise the debt ceiling. But we now have a divided Congress. The Republicans control the House and the Democrats control the Senate. So first, I don't want to freak anyone out. The US government has enough money on hand to get by for the next few months. So Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that the government has enough money to hold them over until June, at least June. Wall Street analysts, they're estimating that the government has enough money to continue functioning until July. So we have a few months. So here's what's going on, and this is not going to be a shocker for most people. The politicians are fighting with themselves. The Republicans are fighting with the Democrats. The Republicans are fighting with themselves. It's just chaos. House Republicans, led by McCarthy, they're basically saying that they're not going to agree to raise the debt ceiling unless the federal government balances the budget, unless there's spending cuts and massive ones. So these Republicans, they're refusing to increase the debt limit until they get the cuts that they're looking for. The Democrats have asked the Republicans, what spending cuts do you want to see in particular? So they basically said, can you specify? So of course, the Republicans responded with wasteful spending. I acknowledge, who's not going to acknowledge that there's so much wasteful spending going on at the federal level? I even dedicated a video to that on wasteful government spending. But the Democrats, they literally want a list. They want the Republicans to list it out. What are the big cuts that are actually going to move the needle in balancing the budget? But the Republicans, they're dragging their feet on this. And of course, both sides are fighting. And during this whole time, during all this argument, the Democrats, they're putting a lot of words into the Republicans' mouths. For example, I'll give you the bigger one. This is just politicians being politicians. McCarthy and the Republicans, they brought up Social Security and Medicare. Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, "It's not clear what conservatives want, whether it's cuts to Social Security and Medicare or to military pay or public health programs." Schumer said, and I quote, "Frankly, I expect House Republicans will struggle to come up with a serious answer because deep down they know that no matter what they propose, their cuts will be deeply unpopular with the American people." So the Democrats are pushing this story. Maybe the Republicans, maybe they want to cut Social Security payments or Medicare. McCarthy responded by saying, no, cuts to Social Security and Medicare are off the table. That is not going to happen. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin met with McCarthy, and Manchin said, McCarthy is not going to cut Social Security or Medicare. All this is going on. Trump, he even jumped into the dialogue. He recorded a video message and he passed it along to his fellow Republicans. Trump said, and I quote, "Under no circumstances should Republicans vote to cut a single penny from Medicare or Social Security. Cut waste, fraud, abuse. Everywhere that we can find it, there's plenty of it. Save Social Security. Do not destroy it." Okay, so basically, this is all a hot mess. President Biden asked McCarthy to put together a list, write this out, put the budget together, put your proposed spending cuts together, whatever you want to do, just write it on a list. So Biden asked this in an official memo. McCarthy responded to Biden by saying, and I quote, "Mr. President, I received your staff's memo. I'm not interested in political games. I'm coming to negotiate for the American people." I cannot tell you with 100% certainty what that means. My best guess is that McCarthy, he does have a list. He doesn't have a physical list, but he's got a list, but it's up here. And McCarthy, he's refusing to write it down because, again, it's already up here. He must have it completely memorized. So listen, I don't know what to tell you. I guess he has the list memorized, but he just doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to write it down. He's just not going to do it. He's not going to do it. But listen, I acknowledge that this is a problem. The whole government overspending, excessive spending, yes, it's a problem. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that annual budget deficits will grow from roughly $1 trillion a year, so annually, to more than $2 trillion annually over this decade. The CBO estimated that the US government will be in debt by at least $42 trillion in the next 10 years. So 42 trillion, we're already at 31. I see 42 trillion as a very optimistic or rosy, scenario. Okay, so let's be honest here. Should you freak out? Should you be freaking out? My answer is no. I am not concerned, not at all. That's because the politicians, they've raised the debt ceiling close to 80 times. So 80 times since the 1960s. So this is nothing new. Yes, we live in a debt-fueled economy. We live in a debt-fueled society. We need more debts. We need more inflation to prevent this whole economic situation from collapsing, from implosion. So the politicians, they're going to keep this charade going on for as long as possible. The show must go on, basically. So failure to raise the debt ceiling, that would lead to economic collapse. If the government can no longer borrow additional money, that would be, in my opinion, that would lead to a Great Depression. Social Security payments would not be made. Medicare would stop. SNAP would stop. Military pay would stop. Government employees would not get paid. Foreign governments, they would dump the dollar, and the U.S. would default on their debts. So in this political game of chicken with McCarthy, I think he's going to blink first. Now, let me tell you what the implications would be on the stock market. So first, it would be the bond market to go. And then the stock market would crash in lockstep. If the government fails to pay their debts on time, if they default, there would be catastrophic consequences in global financial markets. But again, this situation, this is nothing new. But let me tell you what's happened in the past. The fear that the federal government may default has created elevated volatility in the past, but it typically doesn't happen, so we don't reach that point until we get much closer to the government actually running out of money. And again, Yellen said that the government has enough money to hold them over until June. Street estimates are around July when the federal government is going to be down to their bottom dollar. So the closest the US has ever come to defaulting was in 2011. The S&P 500 fell by 16% in 5 weeks. Standard & Poor's, they actually downgraded the US credit rating after that debacle. So this was the first time that US credit was ever downgraded. Congress eventually came to a compromise just days before they actually ran out of money. But I'll tell you this, what happened in 2011 was because we had a divided Congress. And that same scenario is what we have again today. We have the House of Representatives controlled by the Republicans and the Senate controlled by the Democrats. And they're butting heads. And McCarthy, he is very standoffish. So he's got that going for him. So we'll see how this drama plays out, but we still have some time. We have 5 months at a minimum, maybe 6-7 months. So McCarthy is saying that he's not going to agree to increase the debt ceiling, the debt limit, unless there's massive spending cuts. Biden and the Democrats, they're saying that they want a debt limit increase with no strings attached. Okay, so I wanted to update you on the situation, and that's the situation. Let me know how you see this playing out. Let me know how you feel about this in the comments down below. Please subscribe. I thank you for all the support and wish you a very nice day. Please take care.